Hello, I'm going to review for your Esther test. So let's begin. So our story begins in Babylon. Remember that the Babylonian kingdom took over the Jewish people, and God allowed it because it was a means to discipline them. But with the same, he told them and he sent prophets to make them aware that it wasn't going to be forever. So they knew that the Persian kingdom was going to take over the Babylonian kingdom because God had told them and sent it in with a messenger, with one of the prophets. They also knew that they were going to stay in Babylon only for 70 years. So the 70 years occurred. The Medo-Persians took over Babylon, and now we have a king called Ahasuerus. In some texts, they call him Xerxes, but in the Bible, they refer to him as Ahasuerus. So King Ahasuerus is in his third year of his reign, and his kingdom is from all the way from Ethiopia all the way to East India, right? So it came to be that in the third year of his reign, he wanted to celebrate his kingdom and to show off everything that he had done and all of his riches and all of his glories. So he had a really, really big party that lasted 120 days, right? Banquet. And at the same time, his queen her name was Vashti. She also had a banquet for the women. So it so happened that on one of the nights of the banquet, the king was really happy, maybe had a little bit too much to drink, and he wanted to show off. Remember that the main reason that he was having this party was to show off his riches, how rich he was. So in the middle of the party, someone tells him, how about your wife? How about King Vashti? Where's King Vashti? So he sends for Queen Vashti, and Vashti tells her, no way, I'm not going. That infuriated the king. The king then vanishes Vashti from the kingdom, from the courts. That means that she cannot come before the court. And they start looking for a new queen, and that's where Esther comes in. So we have Esther, not a queen yet. So we have Esther and Mordecai. Mordecai is Esther's cousin, but they have a very special relationship, and they treat each other as father and daughter. But in the Bible, it says uncle too. So at some phrases, they refer to each other as cousins, uncles, and that they had a really close relationship like father and daughter. So Esther was very beautiful, not only her physical beauty, but she was also beautiful inside. And what made her beautiful? The knowledge of the one true God. So it happened that they came throughout the village. They collected all of the virgin women. They took them to the palace. They were in the palace for a whole year without ever seeing the king. And during this whole year, they were prepping them for the day that they met the king. They would put oils and fragrances and beauty treatments on them. So for a whole year, that's all they did, was prep the outer beauty. They only took care of the outer beauty. But the inner beauty can be taken care of by the acknowledgement and by being obedient to the things that God tells us to do. So it came to pass that when King Ahasuerus saw Esther, he fell madly in love with her he was very attracted to her because not only her physical beauty, but the beauty that was inside of her. And that made her different from all of the other participants. So Esther is the queen of Persia. During all of this, the king still doesn't know that Esther is Jewish. So we have Haman comes into play. Haman is a prince, and Haman, historically, his people and the Jewish people had an incident in the past, and he was still holding a grudge because of this. And because of this, Mordecai, which was the gatekeeper, he was always in the court of the palace. Mordecai, Haman had to see Mordecai every day, and that just ruined his day. He just did not like Mordecai. He wanted to annihilate Mordecai. He didn't want Mordecai to exist ever and ever, ever. He hated Mordecai, right? So, and one of the reasons, let me go back to Mordecai. One of the reasons he hated Mordecai so much was Haman, King Ahasuerus, had made Haman the second in command in the kingdom. And because of this, you had to bow down to him. And Mordecai never bowed down to him. So that really bothered him. He was really bothered by this, because how dare you not bow down to me? But Mordecai did not bow down to him, because the only person that he bows down to is the one true God. So Esther is with her companions in the palace. She has the best place. She's very well taken care of, because to her fortune, she has been befriended by the main guard, and he favors her, and he does he does things for her. He makes sure that she's safe. Okay. So, time goes by. Our story continues. Haman still has a grudge against the Jewish people. He goes before the king, and he starts talking about people that don't believe the same things that they believe, that they don't stand for the same things that he stands for, but never mentions who these people are. The king wasn't really paying attention, and he was like, you know something, here's my ring, do whatever you want, don't bother me with that mess. And Haman, taking that opportunity, he made a creed which said that all of the Jewish people would be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, right? And that letter was sent out to all the land. It went all over the place. When everybody heard of this, they mourned, and they tore their clothing, and they threw ash on themselves, and they wore rags to show that they were mourning. It so happened that this information got to Queen Esther, that Mordecai was mourning and was walking with sackcloth, and she wondered why, and she was worried about him. So she sent him some clothes, and with one of her servants, and the servant came back with the clothes, saying that he didn't want the clothes, and what was the reason why he was doing this, and that worried her so much. So she sent word to Mordecai and told her that she was going to fast for 3 days, and that they should do the same thing. So the Jewish people and the queen all fasted for 3 days, because she was coming up with a plan. She wanted God to help her to come up with a plan of how to approach the king, because she needed to communicate this information before the king, but she couldn't just show up. The king had to summon her. I just remembered an important detail. Back at the beginning of the story, there is an incident where Mordecai hears a conversation of 2 guards that are plotting to assassinate the king. That's very important. Mordecai tells Esther. Esther tells the king. The king kills these 2 guards that were plotting to kill him, to assassinate him. Moving forward. So Queen Esther is praying for God to give her a plan for her to go before the king. when she goes before the king, that is against the law, is an offense. She's um, putting her life at risk. The king um, stands out his specter, and that is giving her permission to speak before the king. Because when he saw her, instead of being angry, he was very pleased to see her because he had fallen truly in love with her. So there, Esther tells her that she has a petition to ask him. And he says, ask me whatever you want. I will, even if it's half the kingdom, it's yours. And she says, no, all I want is for you and Haman to come to a banquet. So the next day, they go to the banquet, they eat, they have a good time. She treats Haman very respectfully. Because of this, Haman believes that he's in good favor with the king and with the queen. At the end of the banquet, the king asks Esther again, what is your request? And she says, no, I just want you guys to come back tomorrow. I have another banquet for both of you. So the next day, so after the first banquet, Haman goes back to his house and he's boasting and carrying on about how he's the favorite and how the queen favors him and so on. And his wife and his friends tell him, you know something? He says that the only thing that makes him unhappy out of all of this is the presence of Mordecai. So his wife and his friends convince him to build some gallows out in his courtyard so he could hang Haman. It so happens that the king has a restless night, and he sends for the records to be read to him. So when the records come and they start reading the accounts that have happened in the kingdom, they read to him the section where Mordecai tells him, informs of the plot to kill the king. And the king asked if anything was done in order to honor Mordecai for this, and he didn't do anything. So he sleeps on it. The next morning, when Mordecai comes to visit, he tells Mordecai, Mordecai, I have a question. If I was to honor someone, how would I do it? And Mordecai, thinking that he was the one that was going to be honored, he says, oh, dress him up in your royal gowns and sit him up on your royal horse and parade him around the city, and to proclaiming that that person has found favor before the king. The king says, that's a great idea. So the king tells Mordecai, the king tells Haman that he is to go to Mordecai, take his royal gowns, take the royal horse, and to parade Mordecai around the city. So this is a humiliating part for Haman. Remember, Haman detests Mordecai. So, and Mordecai is the one being lifted up, and he's the one being humbled. Continuing with our story. The next day, Queen Esther holds the banquet. And after the banquet, the king again asks Esther, what is the petition that you want? And she tells him, I want, the petition that I have is that someone has signed a decree to kill all of my people and to kill me. And he goes, who has done such a thing? And she says, it has been Haman. And there the king becomes infuriated because Haman did not inform him with all of the details, and he kind of took advantage of the king. And the king was, at the same time, the king wasn't very careful. He didn't listen to what Haman was actually trying to plot. So the king became very furious when he found out the information. He leaves the room to think, and when he comes back to the room, he finds that that Haman is pleading and grabbing onto Queen Esther. And immediately that he walks in and he sees that he was already angry. Now he's furious. He grabs Haman. He says, "How dare you attack the queen in my presence?" And he sends for the guards, and he tells the guards to go hang Haman in the same gallows that he built for Mordecai. So Haman ends up hung on the gallows in his backyard. All of the possessions, the house and everything that he owned, goes to Mordecai. But we still have the issue of the decree. So right there, Queen Esther explains to the king everything that happened. The king sends for Mordecai and tells Mordecai to write a new law protecting the Jewish people, telling them that they have the right to defend themselves, and they could take any property of anyone that attacks them. This decree was sent all over the kingdom, and the Jewish people were saved. When the decree arrived to all of the different towns and provinces, because it was 120 provinces. So when it arrived, everyone was very glorious and very happy about that they were no longer in jeopardy of being killed. To this day, this is celebrated in the Jewish feast by the Feast of Lots. And it's called the Feast of Lots because Haman threw lots in order to find out which Jew he was going to kill first. But unfortunately, he was the one that ended up dead. After this, the Jewish people are liberated. I mean, they did not die. One particular thing about the book of Esther is that the name of God is not mentioned throughout the book, but you do see God working throughout the book. That red string of Jesus Christ, of the Messiah, is there. When she prays to him before she goes in front of the king, when the king cannot sleep and has a restless night, and when they bring the history books, what they read to him is exactly the passage where they're talking about Mordecai. So all of these different events demonstrate how God intertwines in our lives. The same way that he did with Esther, he does that for us too. He's always at work, and even though we don't see that he's working, he never stops working. So he's always there, even though sometimes we are desperate and believe that, where are you? Why aren't you here at this time? But God is always present. So always keep him in your prayers, always keep him in your thoughts, and live a life that glorifies him. Study for your Bible test. Bye.